Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll call the meeting to order then. We only have 1 hour to spend with our guests, so we'd like to make the best possible use of it. Welcome today to the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates as we deal with the supplementary C estimates as they pertain to the Treasury Board Secretariat. And we're pleased to welcome some regular and frequent guests back to the committee from the Secretariat to explain the supplementary Cs. And I've spoken to Bill Matthews, who is heading the delegation, and he says he has some introductory remarks that might help us focus where the bulk of the costing and spending is. So I'd like to allow Mr. Matthews to take the floor first and tell us what he would like about the sub-Cs, and then we'll try and maximize the questioning after that, if that's okay with everybody. Great. Mr. Matthews, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ça nous fait plaisir d'être. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really happy to be here this morning in order to help you in your study of the supplementary estimates for 2012-2013.
Tabled yesterday, there is a presentation that we thought we would go through very quickly to help focus committee members maybe in getting ready for their study. Je vais parler des dépenses du gouvernement.
I will be talking about government expenses in general, and then I will give the floor to the Chief Financial Officer of the Treasury Board so that she would talk about the Secretariat's spending or expenditures.
Has a presentation in front of them. Good. What I will do, Mr. Chair, given that there is a bit of a time crunch, is I would like to start on slide 4. The first 3 slides simply give some background about what's in this deck and how the estimates are organized, but I will actually move right to slide 4 and get started there. So what we have on slide 4 is what's in Supplementary Estimate C itself. Voted items of $1.5 billion. Statutory, we have a decrease of 0.1 for a total of $1.4 billion. I will take this opportunity to remind members of the distinction between budgetary and non-budgetary. Budgetary items are items that affect the bottom line of the government. Non-budgetary are things like loans, investment advances, where if all goes as planned, we would not actually end up incurring an expense. And we can talk later about Canada's student loan write-off if that's of use, because that's a really good example on this front. Statutory items in Supplementary Estimate C are not voted on by parliamentarians. They are just here for information, and we have a variety of changes in the estimates on that front, but it's worth paying a bit of attention to as we go through this deck. Slide 5, if you're curious about what the total of estimates look like. I always warn people about comparing Supplementary Estimates A for one year versus A for the previous year because there are timing differences. But when you get to the end of the cycle, it is actually worth the time to sort of step back and see what the picture looks like this year versus last year. So if you compare 2012-13 versus 11-12, you will see that we have voted of 98.6 in 12-13 versus 99.9 in the previous year. And on the statutory front, you'll see a slight increase. We are at 160.4 versus 159.7 in the previous year. Overall, for the total, 259 in authorities, including Sub C, versus 259.6 in the previous year. But it is worth understanding the difference between voted and statutory here. Where I would spend most of my time is on slide 6, Mr. Chair, and that's the major voted items you'll see in these Supplementary Estimates C. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we have in this $1.5 billion in voted, and there's some really major items that make up that amount, so I'll just walk through those one by one if that's of use to the committee. First up, you have National Defence for the Canadian Forces Income Security Insurance Program, $726 million. That's a payment that's going to Manulife Insurance because as a result of an agreed-upon settlement, there was an agreement to pay back some amounts where we had offset veterans' disability amounts versus the Canadian Forces disability amount. They're now being sort of kept whole, so that agreement's been reached. Manulife had advanced the payments to the members receiving those, so we're now topping up Manulife for that amount. The second amount is $438 million, again for national defense. There's 2 items in there. Part of it you'll be familiar with. We have spoken to this committee before about the elimination of severance benefits as part of the collective agreements. National defense is part of that process as well. So in that 438, there is $200 million roughly for severance. The balance of that relates to the Canada First Defence Strategy. Third item, HRSDC, write-off of unrecoverable student loans of $231 million. This is a great example of budgetary versus non-budgetary. When these loans are issued, they are non-budgetary because we expect to recover them. When we get to a point where we're writing them off because of the 6-year statute of limitations has expired, they now become budgetary because we're basically taking an expense for the write-off of the amounts, $231 million for that, and happy to speak more about that if that's of interest. National Defense, again, for $144 million. That's for the training mission that relates to a NATO mission. It's for training for both the Afghan National Army as well as the police force, and that's being run by National Defense. Foreign Affairs, the London High Commission of $108 million is an interesting one. In that case, they're actually co-locating or combining 2 buildings into one. Currently in London, we occupy 2 buildings. There's some space adjacent to one of the buildings that is being bought, so they can actually be housed in one location. This amount is really flow-through financing. When we sell the second building, we will recover this amount, but we're actually using this amount to buy the adjacent property and get going on the consolidation there. Copenhagen Accord, I think you may have seen before that this is some amounts for CETA, Environment Canada, and Parks Canada. related to that agreement. CEDA, I should mention the $100 million for child protection, maternal and newborn health. This is not new money. CEDA is moving their funding mechanism. We're actually going from a contribution to a grant. But because of that, we actually have to go to Parliament to get approval to increase the grant ceiling. So it's not new money here, but we're moving from contribution to grant. And lastly, we have Public Works for $85 million, and I do understand that Public Works is scheduled to appear shortly after us, so I'll let them explain their bits here. On the statutory front, slide 7, again, just for information purposes, Human Resources, Enhanced Employment Insurance Benefits, that relates to Budget 2009. And the intent there is to hold the EI account harmless for the additional benefits. And there was initially $2.9 billion set aside, if I recall. So this is to top that up to basically cover off all the expenses there. Human Resources, again, guaranteed income supplement. We're increasing the forecast by $143 million. You can split that into two things. One is an increase in the number of recipients by about 13,000. The balance of $74 million relates to an increase in the actual benefit payment per recipient. So there's two pieces to that. The Disability Savings Grant program, again from Human Resources. The issue there, we've got $115 million, is they've changed the criteria to allow carryback, much like you would have if you think about income tax and carry forward, carry back of losses. They've basically expanded it to allow carryback, which is going to increase the amounts paid out, so $115 million there. Human Resources, again, Old Age Security, $105 million. You can split that, again, between an increase in the number of recipients by about 6,000, as well as an increase in the actual entitlement. Finally, a decrease in the forecast related to unmatured debt, so that's interest, $762 million, which relates to interest rates. Slide 8, we have the horizontal items. And just a reminder that horizontal items are items where we have more than one department receiving funding. We do dedicate some paper up front in the Supplementary Estimate C document to going through horizontal items so members and parliamentarians can see which departments are receiving money. So we do have the list of those that are receiving funds through Supplementary Estimate C. Copenhagen Accord I've already touched on. The international crisis response for $60 million, that's a change in the way we're actually funding that. That is supposed to be, and is always intended for things like earthquakes, food emergencies around the world, and the process we had in place before, it was very time-consuming for CEDA and other organizations to get their money. Given that it's a crisis response, we thought it would be better to actually put the money in the reference levels. In case there is a crisis, the department can actually take whatever required action they need to on a faster basis. The other ones I'll flag for you here, modernization of the pay administration is Public Works, $26 million. They've, as well as Shared Services Canada, they're coming up next, so you may want to have questions about that. Finally, government advertising programs I know get some attention, so I'll mention it. There's $1 million in here for advertising. That's totally related to Canada Revenue Agency around advertising for tax credits and deductions and rules. Slide 9. I did want to talk again about the Budget 2012 spending review. And we have spoken about this before, but you will see in the Supplementary Estimate C a line that says less funds available in the vote. So you may recall last year when we tabled main estimates, it was in advance of the budget, and we did not have the Budget 2012 reductions. And so as departments come in for new spending, if we have money that were in their main estimates that they no longer have access to spend, we do a netting of the two. So that's happened again here. So we've highlighted for you where we've netted off those amounts. In Supplementary Estimates B, we had netting of $483 million. In Supplementary Estimate C, we have another 58. If a department does not come in for additional funds, we simply freeze the money centrally and put the controls in place that way. But basically, there's no point giving a department access to new money if they can't spend what they already have. And that's what this netting is all about. Finally, slide 10, before I pass it over to the Chief Financial Officer for Treasury Board Secretariat. $1.5 billion in voted expenditures. I did highlight some of the major changes to statutory forecasts for you. Not all departments are in here. We have 49 departments and agencies here. Again, if you're not looking for additional funds, there's no need to be in this document. So there's only 49 departments in here. So if you're looking for a certain department and you don't see it, it's because they've not come forward with additional spending requirements. And a final reminder that at the end of the Supplementary Estimate C is the draft of the appropriation bill. It is the appropriation bill itself that Parliament approves. these estimates documents are simply to help support your study of that, but you should spend some time looking at the appropriation bill itself, because that is what Parliament approves. With that, I'll turn it over to Christine Walker to speak quickly about Treasury Board Secretariat itself.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Supplementary Estimate C for the Treasury Board Secretariat as a department. There's only 2 items in Supplementary Estimate C. The first one is a very small item for $75,000, and it's a transfer from Industry Canada to the Treasury Board Secretariat for the National Managers Community. This community was established in 2000, and it's to help managers continue to be effective leaders as the times change. And funding is actually for that program is received from 36 different departments and totaling over the year $2.7 million. The second item that we have is the approval of the Vote 15 compensation adjustments. This is money that is actually within Vote 15 and will be allocated to other departments for $10.7 million. This is really the adjustments due to the extension of 2 types of allowances, transitional allowances and terminable allowances. And this is not base pay. These are time limited, and this is in complete compliance with the budget. So these are, once again, they're not salary increases. And the groups that this affected were things like nurses, actuarial scientists, financial resources as well within the government. So these were kind of very technical resources that received these allowances. On slide 12, it really just shows you what the total estimates of the Treasury Board Secretariat are to date. So for the Treasury Board Secretariat, we will end at $252 million for Vote 1, and the compensation adjustments will be $10.7 million. And at that, I will end my remarks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Walker. Mr. Matthews, does that conclude your introduction?
It does. If I could maybe make a final request, Mr. Chair, that if members do have questions that relate to a particular page in the supplementary estimates document, if you could be kind enough to let us know which page, that would help us.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think this does help to focus what little time that we have. Although I know Mr. Ravenat wants to make a point. Were you raising a point of order regarding the timeliness?
Well, I don't know if I'd call it a point of order, but I'd certainly, if we all recall here in the committee, we asked in our recommendations on the estimate process that we be given sufficient time to study the estimates. I mean, look at this, right? And we got this at 3 p.m. roughly yesterday, and we're meeting now at 11 o'clock to discuss all of this. This is the committee that's responsible for passing the estimates. Is that the government's dedication to transparency? Was there no consideration for the recommendation brought by this committee to have more time? I mean, it comes to a point where it becomes a question of privilege. A parliamentarian has to have the time to do the work that he has to do in a way that is thorough and well done, and you can only do that if you have access to the information you need. And it's unbelievable that we get this less than 24 hours before we have this meeting. I think that point needs to be made, and there were ways of adjusting the schedule. It should have been done, and I would expect that the government would be more dedicated to proper due process.
Okay, you've made your point, Mr. Ravenat. On the same point, are you waiting to speak to this?
On the same point, yes.
I'm trying to decide if it's a point of order or not. There was no real point that you're making in terms of order other than an introductory comment. Do you want to spend some time on this?
I just, for the record, want to clarify that the government side at the subcommittee yesterday also agreed that we would review the estimates on Thursday. This was a last-minute change as a result of the availability of departmental officials, and your comments are off base.
I think we should be careful what we talk about at an in-camera planning meeting. But I can say from the chair's point of view, I met yesterday with the secretary of the Treasury Board who told me quite plainly that these very people that we need today to talk about the sub-Cs are never available on Thursdays. That's the one meeting that they have to be briefing cabinet, etc., and therefore the original plan to have them come on Thursday wasn't possible. So we went ahead, rather than waste the meeting, we went ahead even with full knowledge it's an inadequate, I have the floor here as the chair, with the full knowledge that it's not an adequate period of time to do justice to these complicated estimates, and the full knowledge that a recommendation from our committee report was that we would try to structure things in the future to give MPs more time. It didn't happen this time, and your point is well taken, but I don't know if there's any real point in debating it much further. I'll briefly, Matthew, and then we'll go on to questions.
Very briefly, with all due respect to my colleagues and the chair, I mean, this touches the relationship between Parliament and the parliamentarians and the staff and our relationship to the departments and ministries that we're ultimately responsible for. And the fact that a particular person or peoples are not available for a meeting just doesn't cut it. It is up to as far as I'm concerned, up to the public service to adapt. It's up to Treasury Board to adapt in order to give us the time to properly study these estimates, because ultimately we're the ones that are responsible, and this committee is responsible.
Dan, we're losing.
I'll just keep it briefly because
we're losing time that we can question the.
No, I would just say that it's a fair concern, but again, there's many different things, and that's one of the reasons why you have an opposition member chairing this committee, is to kind of be able to deal with these things as fairly as possible. And Mr. Chair, it's not a job that I would personally like to have. So I would just simply suggest, though, that if you do have concerns about the scheduling of it, I would express them, discreetly to the chair on your own time, or perhaps your member that is on the steering committee, because again, I think all of us here want to work together and make sure parliamentarians have access. If you look at the report that you guys put out earlier, obviously the government is reviewing that, but it sounds to me that this committee has quite frankly, is very committed towards making the estimate process better. So I would just ask to see a little bit more even-handedness on the comments like that, particularly since we're supposed to be working, together to make sure that Parliament has full scrutiny over these documents. Thank you.
Let's hear from the Liberals, and then let's close it off and go to questioning.
Okay, well, notwithstanding that we've not had these estimates for very long, some of us, including myself, have spent some time studying them and do have questions. So I would propose we go immediately to questions.
Fair enough. It seems to be general consensus. Okay, and the first will be then for the NDP, Matthew Rabinet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to follow up on my colleagues' comments, I do indeed have a number of questions, regardless of the opinion I have with the time that I had, or we had to study, which I think anybody who's reasonable will recognize was way too short, particularly in consideration of the recommendations that came forward by this committee to have a longer time to study the estimates. The first question I'd like to pose is on advertisement, and it's just a question of confirming something for me. If you could go to page 17 of the supplementary estimates. Now, in your presentation, you said that the $1 million was completely related to Revenue Canada and the tax process. Is this 56,600, I believe, is the cumulative total, also included in that $1 million?
If you look at this chart on page 17, and Sally, do you mind finding the reference in French for me so I can... Well,
I believe it's page 17 in the French as well.
Merci beaucoup. Okay.
Ça fait plaisir.
So page 17 in both French and English, apparently. Thank you. The 1.4 is what is in Supplementary Estimate C. When we present horizontal items, what we do is we show all departments, but we also show you the history for the year. So what you're seeing for advertising here is funding that has been approved through Supplementary Estimates A, which was the $51 million. Then you have another subtotal, Supplementary Estimates B, which had two amounts for Canadian Heritage and Natural Resources. That's the last round of subs. In these Supplementary Estimates C, the 1.4 totally relates to Canada Revenue Agency, as the member said. And then the total is 56.6. That's the annual total of all three together. But what is in Supplementary Estimate C is the Canada Revenue Agency piece for 1.4 related to tax measures.
So we are talking about $56 million spending on advertisement.
If you look at the year-to-date, all three combined, in terms of what's been asked for authority through supplementary estimates, it's 56.6.
And the 1 million additional is only related to Canada Revenue.
That is correct. What's in the supplementary estimate C.
Okay, thank you for that. Deuxième question, puisque
Second question. Since you are here today, I would like to ask you a question, a general question, and perhaps you could answer us. This is something that is of concern to Canadians, the conflict between the Parliamentary Budget Officer and also questions concerning cuts in the public service and the impact on services to Canadians. Can you tell us, in the preparation of Supplementary Estimate C, the forecasts of the Parliamentary Budget Officer were taken into account, and if not, why not?
Estimates after they're tabled. So when we're tabling and preparing supplementary estimates, they're based on government spending plans. He will, in all likelihood, issue a report at some point on the supplementary estimate C or the next quarterly financial report. So do we take his forecasts into consideration when we're preparing these? No, we don't, because these are based on departmental spending plans. He will then come along and assess the budget, supplementary estimates, quarterly financial reports, and give his independent analysis to Parliament. But these numbers are based on departmental spending plans, not the work of the Parliamentary Budget Officer.
Okay, I'd like to ask you a question, a more specific item, which is page 3 of the, in French, l'affectation des crédits centraux du Conseil du Trésor.
The application of Central Treasury Board credits under the heading Privy Council. Are you following me? Page number 3. Treasury Board, allocation from the Treasury Board central votes in English. Allocations from the Treasury Board central votes. And the question, there's an amount of 405 to the Canadian Transport Safety Board. I'm sorry, I can't find a page number 3 here. Page number 3 of the slides. Oh. It was on the internet, okay. Adjustments to pay. Vote 15. Pay adjustment.
We actually, so Treasury Board of Canada functions as the employer for the Government of Canada. So I'll turn this over to the Chief Financial Officer if need be. And as departments need resources for some types of collective agreements, et cetera, the central vote money flows through from Treasury Board Secretariat to the department. So depending on the nature of the agreement itself, we have some items where we actually flow money out to departments.
Oui, je comprends, mais j'aimerais savoir la raison.
I understand that, but I would like to understand why this transfer is being made from Privy Council Office to the Canadian Transportation Safety Board. Because as you know, as all Canadians know, there have been cuts in inspections and the inspectors in Transport Canada, and we see a considerable transfer here, and I would like you to explain that.
Just because we're having difficulty finding it, but if you have the answer, Mr. Matthews, if you could briefly.
I think we do, actually. This is a presentation issue. The money actually comes from Treasury Board Secretariat. The issue here is, thank you, Christine, the issue is that the organization in question actually falls under the Privy Council Office in terms of reporting. So it's not money that's being transferred from a Privy Council Office. We've just grouped departments from like a ministry perspective here.
Okay, thank you for that.
Apologies for not being able to find your reference.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that.
Matthew, yep, we'll have to continue in your next round. Peter Braid for the Conservatives.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our officials for being here today. I'm sure, even though we've all had short notice, we will still have a very informed discussion this morning. I have no doubt. My questions will start on page 8 of your slide presentation, Mr. Matthews. I have 2 questions to start with there. I'm curious to know if you could elaborate, please, on the third bullet, the amount of $29 million for the Centers of Excellence for Commercialization and Research. I think you may have perhaps skipped over that one. If you could just elaborate a little bit on that funding, why it's needed in the sub-Cs, and what the funding will be used for.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members may recall that there was an item in a previous supplementary estimates related to this organization that was for the administration costs. These amounts, in fact, are for the awards that have been were awarded back in November by the Canadian Institute of Health Research, NSERC, as well as the Social Science and Humanitarian Research Council. So they're the granting portions of those awards. You may recall that Budget 2007 allocated $30 million a year to these 3 organizations, Centers of Excellence for Commercialization and Research. These amounts correspond to the grants that were the award winners who were chosen back in November, so the department has come forward because they were, in fact, ready to spend the funds. So this actually is the grant portion of that program. The breakdown is $14.2 million for the Institute of Health Research, $7.7 for Natural Science and Engineering, and $6.9 for Social Sciences and Humanitarian Research. So this is the grant portion only.
Okay. And just more explicitly, the centers of expertise to which these funds are going are the Prostate Center's Translational Research Initiative for Accelerated Discovery and Development in Vancouver, Mars Innovation, focusing on therapeutics, medical devices, and diagnostic imaging in Toronto, the Center for Probe Development and Commercialization, which are medical devices, in Hamilton, and the Center for Drug Research and Development in Vancouver.
Great. Thank you very much for that clarification. That sounds like critically important research, I might add. I suspect that in the future these amounts will be reflected in mains. Is this just a timing issue, or will we see these amounts in future sub-Cs as well?
You could see it either. Basically, departments don't come forward looking for funding until they know they're going to need the money. So it's entirely possible you will see them in supplementary estimates in the future. It really depends on the department. Sally, do you have a...
Well, just for example, one of the things that you saw in the last supplementary estimates were the business-led networks of centers of excellence, which were basically partnerships with private sector to try and fund innovative and collaborative business-led initiatives. You saw that in supplementary estimates B because the awards were made in-year post-budget. The overall amounts, though, will, if that program has now been continued as ongoing, Budget 2012 establishes it ongoing, so you will see those amounts in the main estimates for next year at the high level, and more detail in the respective reports and plans and priorities of each of the organizations who delivers them, such as Industry Canada.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. A little bit further down the page, I also want to touch on the second last bullet on government advertising. You mentioned that this is primarily for CRA to inform Canadians, to raise awareness among Canadians about tax credits that are available to them. This is a very important awareness-raising campaign. Could you give us a little more information on how that advertising is done? Is this television advertising only? Is it a range of media? And is this a new initiative that CRA is making an effort to make sure that Canadians are aware of the tax credits that are available to them?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. There is typically advertising done on an annual basis around tax time, and we are in tax season, largely because the tax rules often change, or there's some changes, and also to remind Canadians of which credits they may wish to make themselves take advantage of. So my recollection on this is it's mostly television, but I cannot say for certain if there's not other avenues.
And online television
as well.
and online.
So those are the two major thrusts. But there is typically advertising around this time of year, around the tax package, and so we're at that time of year again.
Right. And I might add as well that this is in line. We had the Finance Committee in this room just before our committee hearing. They recently tabled a report on looking at ways to encourage Canadians to increase their charitable giving. And one of the recommendations from the Finance Committee in their all-party report was to ensure that CRA was advertising and promoting tax credits, particularly vis-a-vis tax credits that are available for charitable donations to Canadians. So I think that that's quite in line.
If you want a brief question.
A brief question. Explain Vote 15. Why is Vote 15 unique, and what goes under Vote 15?
So, Vote 15 is a central vote. It's one of the Treasury Board central votes. And what happens in Vote 15, it's almost like a flow-through account. So what would happen is there would be, for example, a collective agreement that was signed. Money would go into Vote 15, which would basically pay the difference between what departments already have in their budget and what the new collective agreements would have. And then we would flow through those amounts from Vote 15 to the departments. So it really is a mechanism to be able to control the amounts that are transferred to departments to make sure that they're 100% in line with the collective agreements that have been signed.
Thank you. That concludes your time, Peter. Thank you very much. Matthew, if you'd like to continue.
Oui, j'aimerais vous demander.
I would like to ask you, what role does the national community of officials play in the public service?
And what the National Managers Community is, it's a grassroots community, and it's meant for the managers within the public service who are managing people and managing funds. And it is a voluntary network, so they subscribe to the network. It is present in 14 regions across Canada, and it really is an opportunity for help to learn from other managers. There's quite a number of training sessions. Last year alone, there was over 12,000 training
D'accord,
sessions.
je vais vous interrompre là, c'est assez d'informations. Merci.
It was just by way of information. I'll interrupt you now. Does this national managers community organize workshops related to layoffs?
I didn't hear the end of that sentence. I do not know if they have, but I can certainly get back to you.
Et puis, le 75.
And the 75,000, which is being awarded, is this the first transfer? Is this the first type of transfer for this activity?
Going on since 2000, the year 2000, and to date, 36 departments have already transferred funds to the Treasury Board, either through the main estimates or the supplementary estimates, and the total transfer amount on an annual basis is about $2.7 million. So the industry has just transferred it through supplementary estimate C this year.
Puis est-ce que vous pourriez nous dire?
Could you tell us? Can you tell us what this money is for, what activities it covers? And when we talk about the managers, what level are we talking about in the public service?
Managers in the public service, it really is to hold workshops, to hold training sessions, and like I said, I believe it was last year, it was over 12,000 workshops and training sessions were held for the national managers community.
Comme c'est un genre d'organisme de thérapie de groupe pour.
Is this some type of group therapy for managers who are in a difficult position because they're having to cut employees that they need, and this is what I understand that they do?
In several of these sessions, I can answer to your first question. They do have sessions where you learn how to have difficult conversations, which were very much relevant in the context of the deficit reduction and the spending review. They weren't so much therapy as learning specific tools on performance management and measurement, really concrete things that we could take back to the office and apply.
Écoutez, c'est pas cette situation-là.
And this situation, you're not responsible for this situation, and you're not the problem, but it's the way that Treasury Board and the way this government has chosen to cut the public service, which has created a need to have these types of meetings, these sorts of group therapy sessions. It's total chaos in the public service, and I am very supportive of this, of the managers, but I think it's deplorable.
It articulates all of the different training and sessions that they offer. It covers a wide range of tools that are relevant for managers in whatever context.
Surtout dans une situation de crise, je pense.
I think they're all in crisis mode.
Note that this community was established in the year 2000. And it's not just been established recently.
D'accord. OK. Est-ce que vous pourriez...
Could you perhaps give me, and since you're here, could you give me a report or status report on the situation with regard to the impact of cuts in the public service on services to Canadians? Could you give me some kind of an overview of the situation?
The Strategic and Operating Review Deficit Reduction Action Plan Budget 2012 measures total $5.2 billion in savings over the 3 years. 70% of those reductions were around operating efficiencies, and so the majority were targeting operating efficiencies, backroom type things, as opposed to impacting services of Canadians. The 3-year program of reduction, we're about to start year 2, so year 1 is just coming to a close. So the chapter in terms of managing the reductions is not yet closed, but it's ongoing. And, many of the departments actually have service standards. We've spent some time talking about human resource development today. They do have service standards, which they publish regularly in terms of how they're doing. So I think I would suggest maybe keep an eye on those. But I don't have anything specific to say about services to Canadians and impacts, other than we're on track for the 70% to be around operating efficiencies.
D'accord, merci beaucoup.
I'm afraid we don't have any more time to answer anyways, so we'll move on to Ron Kennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to our witnesses. And I'm to say I'm proud to be part of a government that's showing leadership to reform government and taking the necessary steps to provide fiscal responsibility in these challenging global economic times. So I appreciate the information and the opportunity to clarify a couple of questions. One that is a concern that looked at from last year's committee, as well as the write-offs of the student loans. So we're looking at $231 million. I believe it's for over 44,000 students. I just wanted to know if you could enlighten the committee how this compares. I think last year was about $312 million, if I recall, 11-12 for about 98,000 accounts that we had to write. I think they dated back to about a decade. And provide the details on the uncollected loans, as well as write-off versus forgiveness.
A couple of comments I'd make. Student loan programs is a big program. So if you were actually to look at the government's balance sheet, you'd see about $14 billion in accounts receivable related to students' loans. So when you're issuing that volume of loans, you are going to have some write-offs. No one likes write-offs, but I would say that if there's years where you don't see write-offs, it's actually a bad sign. Departments should be coming forward and cleaning up their books on a regular basis, and this is an annual event. Since CRA has taken over collection, the Canada Revenue Agency, of the loans, we have seen an improvement. The default rate has dropped about in half. But you are going to see this on an annual event because departments do need to go and clean up their books. These are write-offs, not forgiveness. So you're dealing with, in many cases, the 6-year time period has expired, so we do write them off. That does not mean the debt is forgiven. Many of these people have left the country or potentially even passed away. So if they do come back into the system for some reason, if they've left the country and have come back, writing off the debt does not stop us from collecting in the future. But it is a bookkeeping event, and we should be doing it on a regular basis, and that's what's being done here.
And the statutory limitations is set by
regulation, if I recall correctly, and it's 6 years. And so you will see this on an annual event, as an annual event from this department.
I think we're running around the high 80% student loans being paid back. Do you know what the number is?
Sally, I think I have some.
The default is less than 14%. So
86,
yes.
87%.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Moving on to High Commissioner Gordon Campbell's amalgamation there in the High Commission and Foreign Affairs in London. My understanding that it's consolidation of the building. It's about $100 million or so, and then the ancillary. So then the existing building is going to be sold. So what happens when that asset is sold? How does that accounting
the money
show in
comes,
the books?
This is basically the way to view this, Mr. Chair, is as bridge financing. When that building is sold, the department doesn't actually get to keep it. It comes back into the Central Revenue Fund, Consolidated Revenue Fund, and essentially pays this back. And those proceeds from sale are expected to be more than enough to offset the cost to acquire this new property, as well as whatever fit-up they need to do to make it one building. And it's Canada House and McDonald House that are being combined. McDonald House, if I recall correctly, is being sold. and the property next to Canada House will then be used to sort of make one grouping of our employees over at that building.
Makes good sense. Thank you. Just looking at all the organizations listed in Sub C, I think there's 49. Is that correct?
I believe so.
There's more organizations, I think, that they're not listed in Sub C. Is there a reason for that?
Correct. So if you think about the process to get into the estimates documents, you basically have had to have money allocated in a previous budget, been through Cabinet, and then to Treasury Board to get your spending plans approved. If you have nothing new, if your main estimates basically cover all your programs, you don't have any new spending, there's no need to come forward in supplementary estimates. So you only have to come forward if you're planning on spending additional funds because you now have Treasury Board approval to spend. There are many organizations that had no such requirements, so you will not see them in here. So this is just supplementary estimate C only represents those organizations that have additional spending requirements. And again, it's departments need parliamentary approval to spend money. They don't need parliamentary approval to not spend money. So they only come in if they actually have additional funding they require. And supplementary estimates B is typically our biggest supplementary estimates, and that again bore out this year. So C is typically one of the smaller ones, and that's why you don't see all the departments here.
Okay, so in Sub B there was 49 organizations, and we're dealing with the offsets. I think there's about 58 million in offsets. Is that normal? See that amount in 2012 reductions in Sub C?
Well, the reductions related to the strategic and operating review of 58 million, they're lower than they were in supplementary estimates B simply because less departments came in. So the lower the number of departments, the lower the amount of offsets we can take advantage of. We'd already taken advantage of 483 million in supplementary estimates B, so it makes perfect sense that because supplementary estimate C is smaller, the amount of offsets is smaller as well.
Thank you, Mr.
It's always
Matthews.
good to have
Thank you,
common
Ron.
sense prevail. Thanks for your hard work.
Thank heavens, common sense prevails once again. John McCallum.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also had a question related to the London McDonald House and Canada House, but in a different context. It's related to the $55 million being allocated under Central Vote 5, which is only supposed to be used for matters that are urgent or unforeseen. Now, there is an item also under Vote 5, $1 million for so-called indigent on-reserve residents. I can see that why that might be urgent or unforeseen. But this plan building changes in London has been going on for some years, so I don't really understand why that required a Vote 5 being urgent or unforeseen.
Right, so urgent and unforeseen, and I'll let Sally kind of finish the story. As you know, there are 3 supplementary estimates periods during the year, A, B, and C. And if a department can't wait for one of those to occur, sometimes we take advantage of Vote 5. You did mention the other case, which was more of the emergency basis. If I recall correctly, and I'll get Sally to correct me, the deadline to close the deal around the new property was fast approaching, and I believe they needed funding before and couldn't wait for the next supplementary estimate cycle to get that funding to close the deal. And the thought was that it was a good deal, that we should take advantage of it, so we used Vote 5 to actually float the department the money to take advantage of that deal.
Okay.
Have I got that correct, Sally?
Yeah, it was simply to meet a final closing date.
Thank you.
Okay.
This next question is for what you might call Treasury Board in its overall expenditure management role. And I noticed that a number of departments, including Heritage on page 41, are claiming $68,000 in funds for, and I quote, to provide a source of funds for the establishment of the Business Transformation and Renewal Secretariat of the Privy Council. So I don't think we're going to be questioning Privy Council. So I wondered if you could tell us, at least in general terms, what this Secretariat is going to do.
I think we won't get a sense of what exactly the Secretariat is doing until some future budgets potentially, but they're a transformation secretariat that's effectively looking at additional ways to save money, and so they've stood up a team, and they're looking at the way government delivers services, both more I think on the back office side, and so they've stood up that team, and departments have contributed to it. I can't say what the outcome has been yet because it's simply too early to say, but they are looking at ways to transform government, either for efficiency or to create better effectiveness.
So the team it's still in its very early stages. It hasn't really
It's
going yet?
been ongoing for, I think, over a year now.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
In Supplementary Estimates B, you would have actually approved an amount for $1.4 million for PCO to stand up the Secretariat. And what you're seeing here is, while we asked for those monies to be approved for PCO, it's not a new hit on the fiscal framework. We're actually taking that money from other departments. So in effect, it's a transfer.
Right.
So you're going to see that in over 20 organizations as we pull the same amount as that 1.4 that was approved in Supplementary Estimates B.
Okay. Last question. I have a particular interest in the Rouge National Urban Park because part of it's in my riding, and I noticed $3 million for that. Can you tell us what that's about, or what that money is to be used for?
Sure, I'll start and then ask my colleague Sally to chime in if need be. The park itself, I know there's a couple of things happening on this one. One is there's some land that has come free related to a Pickering airport, so they're actually increasing the size of the park because of some additional, I believe it's 1,900 acres of land from the Pickering airport. The $3 million that they're getting through these supplementary estimates themselves, I'm actually going to turn to Sally and see if she can add to that.
Yeah, so the first portion, $2.1 million, is for Parks Canada to just begin the process of establishing the park. Okay. Transport is also asking for some funds. They are contributing 1,917 hectares, so the whole park should be about 5,000 hectares. So this is really to launch it, but they are indeed, I mean, this is early stages, working out the boundaries and pulling it together. You'll be seeing this one again.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
30 seconds if you have a brief question, John. Okay, very good. Thank you. Bernard Trottier.
Thank you once again for coming here. I want to focus some questions about line 15, vote 15, I should say. But before doing that, I appreciate some of the background material that you did provide, especially in the presentation that you gave Mr. Matthews on slide 5. This gives a good overall context of what's going on. And looking at the total line items and the voted line items, I see there's a downward trend. Now, realizing these are nominal dollars, in real terms, you can see a pretty strong trend in terms of overall spending reductions. Is there any inflation number that the Treasury Board Secretariat uses when it does planning? Like right now, will be an inflation assumption that we can get a sense of what these reductions mean in real terms, given that we live in a real world, not a nominal world.
You would see there's no standard inflation rate we use when we're preparing these things. You would see a standard inflation rate applied more likely when Department of Finance is doing their forecasts, particularly around statutory payments. Because if you think about many of the statutory payments relate to benefits for our older population. So, the demographics are changing. I did flag 2 items that have gone up, guaranteed income supplement as well as the old age security. Both of those had an increase in terms of the amount payable per recipient, so there's inflation factoring in there. When we factor in the departmental spending plans, generally speaking, there's no inflation built in.
Right.
We do have something called, Vote 15, where in the past departments would have been resourced for any, increases in payroll they had to absorb. But you may recall there's an operating budget freeze that's been in place, so many of those increases have been funded by departments themselves. But to get back to your question, there's no standard factor we use. Better question for finance in terms of their budget planning. Is there a standard rate they use?
Okay. Well, fair enough. So getting back to vote 15, there was an adjustment of $10.7 million for compensation adjustments. Can you give us a sense of whether that's these compensation adjustments are because of changes in pay grades, or are there adjustments for inflation that are embedded in those changes?
For these are not adjustments for pay grades. These are not salary adjustments or compensation for inflation or anything. These are really 2 things. They're for what they call transition allowances and terminable allowances. And so they're very specific items. They are terminable allowances are usually one time, and they're renegotiated they would be negotiated again in the collective agreement. So that's the reason that goes into vote 15. Then, as you see, there's a chart that shows where it will go from vote 15 to all of the departments and agencies. And what's also important here is that When we had the cost containment freeze, that means that departments and agencies must absorb any salary increases, which they are doing. These are not considered salary increases. These, again, are
And in the compensation adjustments in Vote 15, are there any increases in the number of positions? Okay.
If I could just, Mr. Chair, terminable allowance is an awful term because it does give the connotation of termination. It has nothing to do with termination. It's an allowance that was intended to be temporary in nature. So if we have a particular job classification where we know that the private sector is paying more and we want to, we have a retention issue, we will top up base pay with a terminable allowance. If we get to the point where we say, you know what, this is actually a permanent adjustment in the compensation for this type of individual, nurses is a great example, we will roll those allowances into the base salary structure once we're convinced it's a permanent structure. But the allowance itself is meant to be temporary in nature, and that's why it's called terminable. Nothing to do with termination.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, just as in your presentation, you talked about the use of some spending for horizontal items, and maybe for the benefit of the committee and for Canadians in general, could you explain the use of horizontal items, and is that an increasing trend within the Treasury Board Secretariat to more and more spending going through horizontal items, and what does that mean compared to, I guess the opposite would be vertical items?
There's two pieces there. There has been increased effort in the last few years to give additional attention to horizontal items. They're items where, more than one department is receiving money for a linked initiative. And members of Parliament, when they were studying estimates in the past, they were concerned that if they only saw the bits in each department, they never saw the whole picture. So by putting some additional pages in to flag horizontal items, members, when they study things like the Copenhagen Accord, can see which departments are getting money, and they get a picture of the whole initiative. Can I say there's an increasing trend to, multi-department initiatives? I'm not sure that's true necessarily, but there is certainly an increasing trend to provide additional disclosure around those things.
Your time is up, Bernard. That concludes our first round. We have enough time for one government and one opposition speaker in round two, but in this interim, I want to take the opportunity to ask you, Mr. Matthews, one of the tools we use in trying to plow through the estimates is the report on plans and priorities. Now that the main estimates have been tabled, when can we expect the report on plans and priorities so we can to help us with our deliberations?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I cannot give you an exact date just yet, but I can tell you that it will be earlier than last year, and I would expect in the next few weeks. But I can't say for certain which exact date, but coming in the next few weeks.
Okay, fair enough. Matthew, 5 minutes.
Well, earlier than last year is encouraging. Thank you. Glad to hear it. I want to just get back to the question I asked you in my last round, and that was about the current state of the cuts to the public service. And you said in your response to me that you were pretty sure, Mr. Matthews, that most of the savings were in backroom or internal services. Now we know that the PBO disagrees with that assessment, and since you're in the bowels of this and you're the expert, why is there a discrepancy between what's the methodological problem here?
There's 2 points I'd make. Operating efficiencies is different than internal services, and so 70% of the cuts are in operating efficiencies. So just to give you an impression of the distinction, internal services are HR, finance, legal, all that stuff. Operating efficiencies are a little bit broader. So if we decided we could deliver a program with less travel, that's an operating efficiency. It's not internal services, but it's not a reduction in terms of how the program is delivered or the program itself. We're just delivering it more efficiently. So I would say 70% of the cuts or reductions in operating efficiencies is more than just internal services. So there is some confusion around that. The second part of your question around the confusion around the parliamentary budget officers and the numbers from the Treasury Board Secretariat, we have a process in place where we look at, we have the same numbers he does. We have found it would be useful if we could see his reports in advance so we could actually work through the disputes. I think we would all agree that Parliament's not well served when we get 2 sets of numbers out there. So he's put his numbers out. We've looked at internal services. We see a 6% reduction versus the previous year. He has an 8% increase. We can't recreate his numbers, but I think we would all agree that we would be in a better situation if we had a chance to agree on those numbers before they were produced.
I certainly agree with you, Mr. Matthews, but really here also it's the qualitative analysis of these numbers, the parliamentary budget officer is saying there are clear impacts on frontline services, that cuts are occurring on frontline services, that those cuts do amount for some of the savings that the government is pursuing. So it's also a difference in interpretation. How do you explain that?
I don't think I recall seeing something from the parliamentary budget officer where he's been able to articulate impacts on frontline services. There is that distinction I mentioned between internal services and operating efficiencies. And I believe the parliamentary budget officer's concern was if he wasn't seeing the reductions in internal services, therefore it must be services that are being impacted. And as I mentioned, A, we don't agree with his number on internal services, and B, we're talking about operating efficiencies, which is a lot more than just internal services.
Another quick question, if I have the time. Now, when it comes to giving direction to departments to make savings, was there from Treasury Board any guidelines with regards to reducing backroom or savings in backroom and internal services, and avoiding, obviously, savings which would have an impact on frontline services to Canadians?
Thank you. When this initiative was launched, two things happened. The Treasury Board Secretariat set the expenditure base for each department, and that's important because we excluded certain things from the base. Major transfers, for instance, to Canadians and provinces were off the table, so they couldn't cut those. So the logic is you can only cut what's in your base. We also said to departments at least a proportional share of your savings have to be operating efficiencies. So you can't achieve your target simply by eliminating one big program. So when we communicated each spending base to each department, we were able to give them, look, here's your grants and contribution portion, here's your operating portion. A proportional share of your 5 and 10% spending reduction options has to come from operating. I can tell you that every single department came forward with proposals that were had at least the proportional share from operating. So they did all respect that guideline. So those were the guidelines that were set.
And is there a post-evaluation to...
Is there a post-evaluation in terms of...
In terms of impact on frontline services?
Not that I'm aware of.
Or internal, or the impact on internal services?
I mean, we're certainly, we know what was brought forward by departments, and we've reduced the appropriate vote, so operating versus grants and contribution. So that forces departments to make the reductions where they planned in the first place. And so from my perspective, that gets us what we need.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. That's right on time. Perfect. We just have time for Dan Albus for a tight 5-minute round, and John McCallum has asked for a 30-second question at the end, and I'm inclined to agree. So 5 minutes to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm really happy to find that you're finding the efficiencies here today. Thank you to our witnesses today. I certainly appreciate your presentation and your knowledge on the subject. Earlier, the Chair mentioned reports on plans and priorities. And if I believe, Mr. Chair, that there was a report submitted by this committee, and one of the recommendations in that particular report said that there is a clear linkage between the RPPs and the and supply, and that to have those reports as soon as possible, or even to have them at the same time as main estimates, would be ideal. So to hear that the RPPs are going to be even coming forward earlier than usual, I think is a step in the right direction. Now, linking the RPPs, I did have a question regarding 15C. I believe that's on page 120 of the supplementary estimates. And I'm a big believer in linking, projects, the RPPs strategically. The compensation adjustments, I think Ms. Walker has done a very good appraisal of what is and what is not. Obviously, it's not a salary transition. It's allowance and terminal allowance, transitional allowance, pardon me. And I would just like to because I do have here your RPP in regards to this. I believe it's under Program Activity 2, which is People Management from last year's RPP. Could you just take a moment and link what this particular item is and how that relates to your RPP, and where's the department headed in this direction?
Well, first of all, in our program activity architecture, in fact, the central votes are aligned in a different spot. So they are not part of the people management. What you see in the main estimates, in fact, at the start of the year, vote 15 is zero because it is a flow-through account, and at the end of the year, it's going to be zero. So I think that's just important to note.
Okay.
What would happen if there were any changes in collective agreements? It basically would affect, in the Treasury Board, if I use that as an example, basically the individuals that are working for each one of those program activity areas. So if we had, in this case, for instance, nurses working in the people management area, you would see a slight increase in spending in the people management area for that program activity for the Treasury Board Secretariat. So it's not it's very important to note that the central vote 15, is not linked to the people management PAA, directly linked to the people management PAA program activity for the Treasury Board Secretariat.
Okay, so in what case, if you could just go through a little bit more. I know you've brought this up with Mr. Trottier and then earlier with Mr. Braid, but if you could point out just a little bit further what these funds are supposed to do. I know obviously it's under the Financial Administration Act, so certainly we're bound to it, I'm sure, by law.
The vote 15 is part of the
15C, this extra. What is it? 10 million, yeah.
Yeah, and
6.5.
maybe while Christine just looks for something, this is something you're going to see on a regular basis. So getting compensation adjustments related to vote 15, you will see going from memory in most of our supplementary estimates, because as agreements are signed, they are signed through the year. That they do have various negotiating tables. Departments will need to be resourced for those things. So it's quite normal that you'll see these in almost every supplementary estimates, and it does depend upon the agreement signed. I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think what's important is that what it refers to in the Section 83 of the Financial Administration Act is really about that the terms and conditions of the employment are paid under Vote 15 are going to be paid to vote.
Okay.
To each one of the departments from Vote 15.
Right. And I would add one thing, Mr. Chair, if I could, since the member did bring up reports on plans of priorities, and they are coming. I think the committee would be pleased to know that this year, when you do see RPPs, you will recall your recommendation that had asked for a history of spending and a go-forward, I believe 3 years in each case. RPPs this year will include that, so you will see the change in RPPs. I know Mr. Wallace is no longer on this committee, but I'm sure he'll smile when he sees that.
He would be very happy. 20 seconds.
Yeah. Oh, no, Mr. Chair, I just want to thank our witnesses again, and I believe that they've covered that issue very well, so I appreciate your testimony here today, and I'm sure Mr. McCallum wants to be efficient with his time. So
thank you, Dan. Yes, John, if you could be as tight.
I'll be very quick. I've seen a letter from the Parliamentary Budget Officer to the Secretary of the Treasury Board in which he says that his people consult regularly with Treasury Board officials as they're writing their reports before they release their reports, which seems to contradict what you said about the need for consultation. So there seems to be a difference of interpretation of facts. So what are we to conclude from this?
We do have regular discussions with his staff. The issue is when we get the reports, it's not in time to actually comment on them before they're actually made public. So to give you, I believe some members of this committee would probably use the Parliamentary Budget Officer's integrated monitoring database. We have found mistakes in that database in the past where they've double counted votes, but it's after it's been posted. We would prefer a model where we get the stuff and can have a discussion and offer comments and maybe improve his products before they're made public.
But I thought he said that he already did that.
No, we get them waived in front of us a few days beforehand. We're not left with them to analyze them. So we see them, but with not enough time to actually comment on them and fix them. We're commenting on them after they become public.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Matthews. We'll have to leave it at that. We want to thank the representatives from the Treasury Board Secretariat for helping us with the supplementary estimate Cs and a very useful presentation. I need to suspend very briefly while we change up our witnesses and invite the guests from Public Works. Meeting is suspended. Then call the meeting back to order. We are now about to welcome the representatives from the Department of Public Works and Government Services. Alex Lecroney will be leading the delegation, and John McBain, a regular and frequent friend to the committee, and Madame Brigitte Fortin. Welcome, all of you. And we'll probably only have time for one round of questioning, one complete round, because I do need 10 minutes at the end of the meeting to go in camera and deal with two brief items. So we will begin right away by asking Mr. Lecroney for opening remarks. The floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Alex Lecroney, and I am the Chief Financial Officer of Public Works Government Services Canada, PWGSC. I'm pleased to join the committee today to speak about the department's 2012-13 Supplementary Estimate C. I am accompanied by my colleagues, John McBain, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Real Property Branch, and Brigitte Fortin, the Acting Assistant Deputy Minister of Accounting, Banking and Compensation Branch of PWGSC. Let me start by restating for the committee members that PWGSC is the government's principal common service organization providing government departments and agencies with services in support of their programs. These include procurement, office accommodation and facilities, architectural and engineering services, construction, maintenance and repair of public works and federal real property, translation and related services, and pay and pension services. La ministre des Travaux publics et services gouvernementaux.
The Minister of Public Works and Government Services serves as Receiver General of Canada and has authority for the administration of pay services for federal employees. The Minister is also responsible for maintaining the public accounts of Canada. PWGSC's vision is to excel in government operations by delivering high-quality services and programs that meet the needs of federal organizations while ensuring sound stewardship on behalf of Canadians. PWGSC plays an important role in daily operations of the Government of Canada. As its principal banker, accountant, central purchasing agent, linguistic authority, and real property manager. The department manages a diverse real estate portfolio that accommodates 269,000 federal employees in 1,819 locations across Canada, including the Parliament buildings, injects more than $14 billion annually into the Canadian economy through government procurement, prepares the annual public accounts of Canada and manages a cash flow of more than $2 trillion a year, translates more than 1 million pages of text on behalf of other federal organizations, and provides translation.
This year, PWGSC requested $237 million, primarily for the rehabilitation of the parliamentary buildings. In Supplementary Estimates B, for this year, PWGSC did not request any additional funding. At that time, the department explained that existing appropriations were sufficient to cover any additional program requirements and deferred its request for funding until the final annual estimates exercise. This deferral is a reflection of the department's emphasis on responsible budget management practices. The supplementary estimate C requests $198 million for PWGSC. However, this request was reduced by $50 million as a result of funds available within PWGSC and transfers between departments, bringing the total net request down to $148 million. The first notable item in these estimates is $85 million for real property. These funds are required to cover non-discretionary costs in utility, rent, and fit-up incurred during renovations of Crown-owned and leased office buildings. Another $33 million is requested for office accommodation for various departments and agencies that have received approval from governments, mainly for renewed property priority programs such as those related to Aboriginals, agriculture, security, and national defense. PWGSC is also seeking access to $32.5 million to deliver series of projects on various engineering assets such as dams, bridges, and crossings. Examples of projects delivered by PWGSC include work on the Esquimalt Graving Dock and the Alaska Highway. Access to $23.2 million in funding is being sought for modernization of pay services. The funds will be used to complete the project definition phase and commence the implementation phase of replacing the 40-year-old government pay system. The last of notable items is $15.3 million needed to consolidate all pay administration services into one center of expertise in Miramichi, New Brunswick, ensuring the sustainability of pay administration and contributing to a more effective and efficient public service that offer better value for money for Canadian taxpayers. As announced in Budget 2012, these estimates also return funds as part of the PWGSC contribution to the deficit reduction efforts. Let me now provide an overview of the impact of these estimates on PWGSC budget, taking into account these supplementary estimates C for 2012-13. PWGSC total budget, gross budget, would become $6.3 billion. As the department receives $3.5 billion in revenues from other government departments, once these revenues are taken into account, PWGSC net appropriation is reduced to $2.8 billion. I will draw your attention to the next to the department operating vote, which has two basic components totaling $3.6 billion. $1 billion is needed to deliver on our core programs such as central purchasing and banking, public accounts and payroll, and pension services and internal services. And $2.6 billion is required to pay for rent, fit-up, and utilities for government-wide accommodations, receiver general functions like payments and translation services to Parliament. PWGSC also has a capital vote of $578 million, primarily to invest in Government of Canada buildings and infrastructure. I'm pleased to report that PWGSC has shown leadership in the area of sound financial management and has instilled a culture of budget management excellence throughout its various programs. The department's forecasting accuracy between December 31st and year-end for the last 2 years exceeded 99%. PWGSC also strengthened its oversight role over financial matters, and rigorous practices have yielded economies such as travel and hospitality. I'm pleased to say that these economies were realized while providing comprehensive support to our employees as the department reduced the size of its workforce. Overall, 96% of our employees, affected by the first and second years of strategic review have secured alternative employment and have left the public service. In addition, the employees affected in April 2012 by the implementation of Deficit Reduction Action Plan, 92% have already been placed or have left the public service. En juin 2012, le ministère
In June 2012, our department implemented additional adjustments further to changes in business volumes that affect 86 employees. Of those, 90% have already been placed or have left the public service. PWGSC has accomplished this transformation largely through the efforts of our departmental priority placement process. Finally, Mr. Chair, I would like to say that our departmental efforts to support our most important asset, our employees, have been recognized for a second year in a row. PWGSC has once again been chosen as one of the top employers in the National Capital Region for 2013. The National Capital Region's Top Employers is an annual competition to recognize Ottawa area employers that lead their industries in offering exceptional places to work. We are proud of this award, and we are committed to maintaining our standing as an employer of choice. Members of the committee, thank you for your attention. My colleagues and I would be pleased to answer your questions.
So that should be one full round of questioning. And first, on behalf of the official opposition, Linda Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, all three of you, for attending on short notice. And so we're in equal straits. It's short notice for us to be able to figure out what to ask you. So we're looking forward to your excellent answers, as usual. I would like to go right away to vote 1, and specifically the aspect of vote 1 where you're allocating approximately $2.4 million for cost audits, you call it, primarily for defense spending. I have a number of questions in that vein. It says primarily for defense contracting, so I'm wondering if you could explain to us exactly what the breakdown is, what else is going to be audited. But I would like to ask you, first of all, why another audit on the F-35 process? We had the Auditor General report, to which the Department responded. We had the Parliamentary Budget Officer report, to which the Department's responding. Then we had the independent audit by KPMG for more than $600,000. I went to your Plans and Priorities report for 2011-12, since we don't have one for this fiscal year, which is about to end. And at page 33 of that report, you state under Lessons Learned, Public Works will continue to draw on the quality of its internal audits and evaluation reports to support timely decision-making. So I guess the obvious question is, why is the Department continuing to allocate additional funds for external audits? Why are these not being done internally? And what more can be learned, given that we've already had 3 very thorough reviews of the specific process?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The question is multifaceted, and I will try to cover the 3 facets you referred to. There is the audit of procurement, which is being sought here. I'm going to explain what it entails. There is the audit for internal matters, which is the management of PWGSC, and the F-35 relationship to F-35. This money is being sought to have a capacity or fund capacity internally to ensure that the costs charged by suppliers are reasonable and in compliance with the contract terms of the contract. So it is a capacity that we have because, as you know, PWGSC transit or processes every year about $14 billion of contracts. This is not to cover the entire scope of the procurement on behalf of the government, but it is for the procurement primarily for defense. In terms of as specified. And this money that we have is about $3 million. 2.3 that you see, or 2.4 that you see there, is primarily for salaries, and the other components for benefits under employee benefits plan. And this money is funded for 5 years. The audits of PwC...
Could I just ask clarification there?
Absolutely.
So are you saying for this additional money that is going to be given to Public Works for these audits, this is simply to pay for internal? Are they not already employed, these people?
They are employed by us, but this capacity was funded in the past on an irregular basis. So the capacity was not stable. We had a capacity based on funds available from our Vote 1. What we are doing here is we are stabilizing the audit capacity to make sure these auditors are there to serve and allow our minister to continue to use its contractual rights to conduct audits. Otherwise, we don't want to be exposed to being overcharged if that happens. And this is being done by other countries such as the U.S., etc. It is exercising the oversight that ought to be done on our contracting and the payments by our suppliers.
So you're hiring additional new internal auditors?
It's a mix of both. Basically, we are looking at 30 auditors, having a capacity of plus or minus 30 auditors, that they do only audits on procurements, which is different from what you referred to on page 33, which is the audit for internal matters of PWGSC, which is the normal audit function that you will find in any department. And that function is being, the work of those audits is being looked at by the Deputy Minister, advised by an internal audit committee. And there is thorough governance in PWGSC to follow on those audits. As for the F-35, this is not necessarily related to the audits of the F-35. This is for the audits of our procurement.
Okay, thanks. A very quick one. Our committee is about to undertake a review of energy efficiency in federal buildings. And I'm just wondering if you could tell me where I would find the expenditure. If Public Works has undertaken that they are going to have more energy efficient buildings, where would I find that? I don't see any line item there, and as I understand, there hasn't been any work yet done. I would have anticipated being the subsidies.
Thank you for the question. There isn't a specific line item dedicated to that you would see in these estimates. It is included in the special purpose allotment that Real Property Branch obtains to fund our buildings. It is reflected in things such as our rent payments. We have new buildings coming online that are results of new leases being signed that will be LEED Gold. So through the procurement process and the requirements the Crown stipulates in terms of our tendering process, we require more energy efficient and greener buildings. In addition, the SPA includes money in our repairs to enhance and improve.
If there's any breakdown you can give to me, I'd appreciate receiving it to help our review.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you, Madam Duncan. Next, we have Monsieur Gourde pour 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I have one or two questions on page 6. When you're saying that we've had many questions these last few pages on the strategic restructuring plans with employees, and you see that the number of employees relocated is quite high. Are they all in the public service or elsewhere?
Thank you for the question. As you know, PWGSC is recognized as a model organization in its personnel management, and we have successfully placed employees since the strategic review began, and we have We have implemented certain measures that are viewed as exemplary practices. We have established a very active management system that plans and allows for planning and ensures that there is monitoring of the employees. And this comes, employees from three sources: the strategic review, the operational review, and an adjustment that was made in June to account for our income from clients. And we have created a placement unit that is responsible for placing the affected employees. And each department is responsible for ensuring that affected employees in its department are placed. And we ask each assistant deputy minister to provide plans to integrate employees in other organizations. And we have a very close relationship with the unions, and they are very satisfied with the progress that has been accomplished to date. I would like to provide you with some figures, if I might. On the 31st of January 2013, we had 172,000, and there are now 5% less. And we have a rate of attrition of approximately 8%, approximately 1,000 employees per year. Under the strategic review, 381 employees were affected for the first and second years, and of these employees, 96% have been placed. That is 364 out of the initial 381, either within their departments or somewhere within the public service. For the operational review, 140 employees were affected out of 163, because 23 positions were vacant, and 129 have already been placed, which represents 92%. So in total, overall, 803 people were affected, 699 have been placed. That is 87%. It's a very impressive rate when you consider that we're in the first and second years of these programs. So this represents the work that our department has done. Then the rate of people who are retiring within departments is that higher than the number of people who left. In other words, is the department hiring a new generation, or are they preferring to hire people who've already been in the public service? Is there some opening for the new generation of people? Can they find a position? It depends on the department's objectives when it is deciding to hire new employees. The objective is to conduct recruitment and to position a department or agency for the future. To have staff that will enable it to fulfill its responsibility. There is a place for students and young people and people who are trying to get entry positions. However, overall, the department is committed to achieving its objectives, its financial objectives, and its human resource objectives in the next 3 to 7 years. Yes, and briefly stated, there is a room for young people.
Denis Blochette.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our guests. My first question concerns the reaffectation of information resources with respect to information technology. You have 11 million here, and Service Canada already exists, so I would like to know what this represents. When Shared Services Canada was created, there was a formula with respect to transfer of funds to cover 3 items, and they're all related to IT. One was communications. Secondly, anything that concerned data centers. And third, email. For PWGSC, it was calculated, and we determined that $113 million would have to be transferred. But however, as the figures became more clear, more precise, we discovered 2 things. One is that there are services that will be provided on a cost recovery basis. And, for example, computer support. And this will be provided on an optional basis by Service Canada. But in the transfers that were made, there were 2 types of expenditures that recur. One is expenditures that were one-time only expenditures, for example, costs for the modernization work. That is a sunset program, so it's not an ongoing transfer, so some money has been returned. That represents 3.8 million, and there's another amount for MERX, which is the acquisition system, which is outside of Service Canada's mandate, so they have returned 3.4 million for this system, and there's another 4 million clusters because PWGSC provides services for technology such as PeopleSoft, and others supplies these to small and medium-sized departments, and 4 million was returned there so that we could continue to provide that service. So, in fact, this is a readjustment of the initial transfer that occurred. And with respect to pay services, and for supplementary C, certain amounts that we find in different places. Could you give us a report on what is happening? These are large amounts, and as far as I understand, this is still at a pilot project phase. Can you give us a report on the status of this? Thank you. The remuneration transformation has 2 aspects: modernization and changing pay services. And there is a service center at Miramichi in New Brunswick.
Through this exercise, 23 million for the pay modernization project. So the pay modernization is the replacement of the old pay system and the implementation of new business processes. So 23 million is to complete the definition phase of the project. The definition phase of the project was to design the IT architecture, finalizing the project plan, the detailed costing, buying some IT equipment to prepare for the development, and pay for the project team. So 4.7 million is required to complete the definition phase. And we have received, sorry?
On n'aura peut-être pas le temps de passer tout à travers de tout ça.
We might not have time to go through all of this, but I would appreciate if you could tell the committee tell us where it's going. So what will be what still remains to be done? What stage is it at? Because we'll certainly be hearing about this again. And I would like you to quickly go to the second point. You were talking about modernization and talking about the amounts. What is the second aspect of this?
Five minutes allowed for Mr. Blanchet's questions. A 30-second response, if you can.
Yes, we are currently implementing the consolidation project. We currently have 146 employees already in Miramichi who have started delivering pay services to 12 federal organizations. And we will continue consolidating pay services over the next 4 years.
Thank you, Madame Portenda. That's all the time we have. Next, Kelly Block, and I understand Kelly may share some of her time with Mr. Aspin.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I will be sharing my time with my colleague. I want to thank our guests for joining us today. It's always good to meet with you and be able to ask some questions around the estimates that you've provided to us. I also appreciate having reviewed your RPPs and just looking at your role and mandate. It certainly is broad. There are a lot of things that you need to provide oversight to. And I do want to take the opportunity to congratulate you for once again being receiving the award as one of the top employers in the National Capital Region. So congratulations on that award. I want to talk a little bit about something that you mentioned in your opening statement with regards to the $32.5 million that you are seeking to deliver a series of projects on various engineering assets. And I guess I have a couple of questions. How many infrastructure projects does PWG-SC intend to repair or rehabilitate with these particular funds?
Thank you for the question. There are 7 projects distributed across the country at 7 different assets that we will be spending that money on.
Can you tell me what they are?
Sure. Latchford Dam, Timiskaming Dam, the French River Dam, and in particular the Big Chaudière Dam portion of the French River Dam complex, Des Alumettes Bridge, the McDonald-Cartier Bridge, the Esquimalt Graving Dock, and the Alaska Highway.
Okay. So when you look at the various projects that may need your attention, how do you go about determining which ones you will be working on in any given year?
It starts with detailed inspections, which are carried out on a regular basis for all of our major assets, in particular 4 bridges and dams because of the nature of the structures. Through that, we assess their condition and we prioritize needs that are identified for them. And then through that, we set priorities for the funding which we seek. So we are, of course, health and safety is always our first priority. Secondly, protection of the taxpayer investment in the assets. So timely investment, all part of what we consider to be stewardship. And then moving these assets, bringing them up to a green or a good condition as we detect issues with them.
Okay. So this might be a pretty obvious question, but do you have a capital asset management plan in place then where on an ongoing basis you're looking at all of these different assets and they fit into some sort of a plan?
Yes, we do. The short answer is, in my particular case as the Assistant Deputy Minister for Real Property, it is our core mandate. It is what we do. So our entire business is a real property management framework, which includes an inventory, regular inspections, condition assessment, setting priorities, and then moving those through our budget asks, and then prioritizing the funds that are available to move them. So we have, that is within Real Property branch, and then within the department, that plugs into the department's overall investment management plan.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it over to Jay.
Thank you very much, and welcome, guests. And I just have a short follow-up question on the infrastructure, and congratulations on the infrastructure programs, some $32 million extra dollars, and I think those are good projects to keep the economy rolling. Very good indeed. I'm just wondering, why did this $32 million, which is about 20% of the $148 million, why did this expenditure not appear in the 2012-13 main estimates?
This is, it is just a question in terms of, I would say, in terms of machinery of government. The funds were identified in the budget, and then the department is required to seek government authority to access the funds, and that is done through a Treasury Board submission. So this is just a question of timing in terms of when the Treasury Board submission was heard, in terms of what was it in time to make which part of the estimate. So it wasn't heard in time to go into the mains.
Okay.
But I just, for clarity, the main estimates, as my colleague mentioned, it wasn't there, but it is certainly reflected in our RPP, which is our report on plans and priorities.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Good question. Liberals, John McCallum.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question about reallocations or funds available. And I notice in total it's about $48 million, and two of the larger ones there are Federal Contaminated Sites Action Plan, $32 million, and Sydney Tar Ponds, $5.6 million. So that means of their total budget for the 2012-13, they failed to spend, in one case, $32 million, in the other case, $5.6. So it'd be interesting for me to know what was the total budget. So what proportion of the total budget did they not spend? So, you know, if the contaminated sites total budget was $50 million, then they've spent 18 and failed to spend 32. So it'd be interesting to know that number. And secondly, I'd like to know, in the case of the contaminated sites, 32 million, for example, does that mean that the money not spent in 2012-13 will be added to the estimates for the following year, 2013-14? So that what they didn't spend this year, they will be scheduled to spend next year? Or if not, does it mean it just disappears off the face of the planet? So there are two dimensions to that question. What's the total budget? And the part that is unspent, is it transferred to expenditures in the following year?
Okay. Well, with respect to the contaminated sites funding that is being reprofiled, the total budget for 12-13 was $48.3 million, so 15.8 was spent. The 32.5 is being reprofiled to 13-14 and 14-15. The amounts are $17 million for next fiscal year, 17.2 actually, and 15.3 in 14-15. So this reflects the realities of getting projects implemented, construction seasons, tendering results, etc., as we move through the implementation of these funds, but they will be used for the purposes sought, and they will be used to implement the project. It's just we're moving them forward into 2 other fiscal years.
And what about the Sydney Tar Ponds?
In Sydney Tar Ponds, that one, do you have the total spend on that, the budget for this year?
Let me...
The money is being reprofiled to next fiscal year.
Yeah.
And the majority of it will be used to ensure the closeout. That is the final year of the project. The project is, in fact, 8 months ahead of schedule. It is on scope. It is on budget. And of that money that is being reprofiled, there's about 1.2 that is being held as contingency. So if that's not required, then we would be delivering it under budget. And the rest is to ensure the closeout of the project next fiscal year.
If I may, just to make sure you have the full picture, the whole project is total cost is $428 million. It's shared with the provincial share is $120 million. For PWGSC, the federal share that's managed by PWGSC is $282 million, and with an operating cost of $25 million. In terms of how the project is doing,
I think that's enough. Thank you.
Okay.
I assume for questions for Shared Services Canada about that, should we have their officials here, or can you answer those questions?
I think they should be directed to the SSC officials.
Okay, well, that reflects the discussion we had earlier that perhaps we can get them for 1 hour on Thursday's meeting. You and I discussed, Peter. But I'll go ahead then. I see you have a $23 million request for capital funds for consolidating the federal government pay administration. Can you explain the timelines and costs and possible risks associated with this project?
Yes. So the pay consolidation project, we are proceeding into 4 phases. Over the next 4 years, we have already implemented the first phase with 146 employees on board delivering services. And the project will be completed in 14-15, when the new pay system is implemented. So this is where we are currently, and we are confident that we will be realizing those 2 projects, the pay modernization and pay consolidation, within the $309 million budget. We have it's the same organization managing this project the organization managing this project is the same organization that has just completed successfully within the budget the modernization of pension administration, which was also a major IT project and consisted also of consolidating services into a center of expertise in Shediac, New Brunswick.
Very much, Madame Fortin. Thank you, John. That's your 5 minutes is well up. I'm conscious of the time. This clock is not correct in the room here. It's actually 4 or 5 minutes slow. So it's actually closer to 10 to 1. And so therefore, I think we're going to consider this part of our meeting over and concluded. Thank you very much, Mr. Lacroni, Mr. McBain, Madame Fortin, for your presentation today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will suspend the meeting for just a few seconds while the witnesses excuse themselves.
Monsieur le Clerc.
Committee members are ready. I'm going to put the votes on Supplementary Estimate C. You have them on the flip side of your agenda. Shall vote 95C under Canadian Heritage carry in the amount of $1. Unanimous? On division? On division. Shall vote 7C under Privy Council carry in the amount of $1. On division. Shall vote 1C under Public Works and Government Services carry in the amount of $89,790,744. On division. Shall vote 5C under Public Works and Government Services in the amount of $60,111,617 carry. On division. Shall vote 6C under Public Works and Government Services in the amount of $1 carry. On division. Shall vote 20C under Public Works and Government Services carry in the amount of $1.
Point of order. If it's agreed that we're going to see Shared Services Canada, which is a part of Public Works, then perhaps we should delay the vote until after we see them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's been, yes, briefly. Keep in mind, we're
as I
going
understood,
in
okay, the
camera.
rule was that we request specifically who we want to hear. We weren't interested because we just heard from them. We can hear from them in the mains. I think we have other things to deal with.
I would agree. I think that's a good suggestion.
I thought that was the general feeling, that now that the mains have been tabled, people can go after those lines directly. I'm going to continue. Shall vote 20C under Public Works and Government Services carry in the amount of $1. On division. Shall vote 25C under Public Works and Government Services carry in the amount of $1. Carried on division. Shall vote 1C under Treasury Board carry in the amount of $1. Carried on division. Shall vote 15C Treasury Board carry in the amount of $10,655,589. Carried on division. Shall the chair report the supplementary Cs to the House? It's agreed. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to suspend while we go in camera and discuss 2 items of business stemming from our planning meeting held yesterday. Meeting suspended.